In this particular chess game, we'll do the first few moves of the opening. It's a very solid opening for both sides. Now, this is a really interesting position right here. I marked the white pawn red, and it's not unprotected because there's a knight that's protecting it, but black has a really interesting tactic right here. And if black were to go ahead and capture this pawn for 1 point, if white recaptures, the score is 3-1, but then black could move up the pawn and create a fork on the bishop and the knight, and whichever one of those pieces moves, the other one is going to be captured, and so black will win the exchange 4 points to 3. So that's one of those really interesting opening traps. And a trap is just like a little trick to help gain some extra points against your opponent. Before capturing that piece, black actually had a pretty good idea with moving up the pawn too, but in this position, it's not as effective. And we have talked about better attackers than defenders. And as you can see, there are 3 pieces attacking that pawn, but black only has 2 pieces that are defending it. So that means that white is going to win that exchange. And so the way the moves pan out, white captures the black pawn for 1 point. Black captures the pawn. It's tied 1 point to 1. But then white can capture again 4 points to 1, and the queen can now not capture the knight because it's being protected by the bishop. And so white has actually won 3 points in that exchange. So we will move on. Now here, we've talked about trying to keep the pawns in these flanks. Like right here is some for black. And here's a flank here for white. Just moving random pawns on the outside can cause some problems. And plus it leaves an unprotected piece here for white as well, which black takes advantage of and gets 3 points. And now the game is even again. So that 3-point advantage that white had has now been lost. Another pawn move, which is kind of unnecessary, and there's also an unprotected piece there, which black could take for free, and black does that. And you can see there's now an X-ray attack against the rook. So if the knight moves, not only can the queen take the rook, but it can also put the king in check. And you can see the knight did move out of the way, exposing that check, and there is actually a 5-move checkmate for black in this position. So I'm going to show you what that checkmate is. Black can capture the rook and put the king in check. So we have an electric fence here. The king has to move up. So once you get the king on the run, if you can keep that king running, you might be able to put it into checkmate. And if you look at the black knight, I colored it green because the knight can put the king in check on this move. And we have an electric fence along the bottom rank. The king is in check. There's also an electric fence right here and an electric fence right there. So the king only has 1 square that it can move to in this position. So if we move the king up 1, it's now out in the open, but you can see there is also an unprotected piece. So the queen can now capture the other queen, which is a scalp, and you can see that if the queen can get to the square e2, it's checkmate, and the game is over. So the king only has 1 move to make to not be in checkmate, and that is to move up. So now the queen will check the king again. There's only 1 square that the king can move to, which is this square right here. It's the only one available. So the king will move up to it. And there's a couple of different ways to make a checkmate, but I'll do the most fun, and that is with the pawn. And if you have the king on the run, make sure that you keep checking the king so you don't go into a stalemate. Now, there's plenty of pieces on the board that there wouldn't be a stalemate, because even if the king can't move, if other pieces on the board can move, then it's not a stalemate. But we will apply the checkmate here with the pawn, and the game is over. The way it actually played out, you can see there's an unprotected piece, but black didn't take it. So we will move on. At least white is able to keep this side. So white might want to consider a queenside castle later on in the game. Knights on the rim are grim. A better move would have been to put the knight here on f3 instead. Continue moving here. Here's an interesting position right here. And again, it has to do with attackers and defenders. So here, black has more attackers than defenders. And since the bishop is worth less than the rook, it would be better for the bishop to take the knight. If white recaptures it, then there's another piece that's attacking that can take that piece. So black has a pretty good chance of taking 8 points. It would be better for black to lose 3 points instead of for 5 points. So the bishop would be a slightly better piece to take. But if you look a little bit deeper into this, there's actually something that even works a little bit better than that. And it has to deal with the queen. So if the queen moves down, the queen is now attacking the rook. And if white queen captures the rook, then there's going to be a check on the king as well. So white is probably going to want to protect that. In fact, the computer says the best move for white is to move rook to f1. And now there's nothing defending that knight, and black can take it for free. This is what really happened in the game, though. Black captured with the rook, 3 points. Black recaptured. It's 5-3. And then black recaptures, and now the score is 8-3 in favor of black. Do a few more moves here. Knights on the rim are grim. Okay, a better move for that knight would have been to put it here out in the middle of the board. And when you have a knight in the middle of the board, in fact, you can see right here, when you have a knight in the middle of the board, it can influence 8 squares rather than 4 squares. But we'll move on. Knights on the rim are grim. The suggested move for the computer is c5, and then eventually get that queen along the bottom rank here to put the king in check. Knight captures the pawn. So we'll keep moving. Now you can see there's an unprotected piece, and black has 2 different pieces that can capture it. Capturing with the queen would be much better. But black makes a huge mistake here, and it's a 1-move checkmate. Do you see what it is? Queen to f7, checkmate, and the game would have been over. But that is not.
Checkmate, Vosper, schrecklich.
But that is not what happened. White captured with the pawn, which puts the king in check, but it's not checkmate anymore. King in check, I like that. King moves out of the way. Now, remember what I said before, if you've got the king on the run like white does, keep it running. So here, the white queen could continue to put the king in check. And if the king were to move out of the way, the better move for the king would be right here. But then white does an X-ray attack on the king, pinning the queen to the king, and now the queen cannot move to capture this piece right here. The next good move then would be, and I'm just using the best moves on the computer here. And again, white has that X-ray attack, so there's no reason to execute it right now. White can continue to kind of play with black a little bit, attacking pieces and making black move out of the way before finally capturing the piece and then getting a scalp. But that's not what happened in this game. We'll continue from the position from right here. White moved the rook instead, which is kind of an X-ray attack. Yeah, I guess it's an X-ray attack just the same. So white had a good idea with the X-ray attack, but white could have done a couple of moves before the X-ray attack so that it would be even more powerful. Again, put the king in check. It's out in the open. In fact, it's a one-move checkmate. Queen can move next to the king. Because there's an electric fence right here, there is no place for the king to move. Checkmate. But white missed it. You can see there's an unprotected piece right there, and white takes advantage of it. Very good. White's pawn is considered a passed pawn. And the reason why I marked it red is that this is bad for black. It's great for white. It's going to turn into a queen. So black's got to do whatever it can to keep that pawn from promoting to that square right there. But black moves out of the way. The king's in check. So white has to take care of that. So white captures. Black can now recapture, but white gets the queen back again. So now white has the queen. King is in check. Move the king out of the way. White put the king in check. And the thing that I like about putting the queen in front of the king is that it creates this mini electric fence in front of the king. And you're going to see in a couple of positions in this game where that little mini electric fence is quite important in the game. But black moves out of the way. And here, it's a forced checkmate, and I'm going to show you how. If you have the king on the run, it's always a good idea to keep it running. So remember what I showed you before about that mini electric fence? Put the queen in front of the king, and there's the mini electric fence right there. And also this piece, or this square, is being defended by both the queen and the pawn. King only has 2 squares to move. In general, you want to keep your king in the middle of the board to try to prevent your opponent from checkmating too soon. But in this instance, I kind of wanted to see what would happen if the king moved toward the rook, because I think younger chess players would probably want to try to attack the rook or attack the pawn to see if they could get away with it. So if you've got the king on the run, remember to keep the king in check, because that's usually where the best moves are. So here, the queen can put the king in check by moving to d7. White has the electric fence here. White has the electric fence here. There's an electric fence here. There's an electric fence here. Yeah, these pieces are protected. Black can't move there, so you can see the king only has 1 square to move. So we're going to move the king to this square. Remember putting the queen in front of the king? 2 squares? There we go. Now when 2 kings are in this position, it's called opposition. There's no name for this, but it's a really effective move because, again, it creates that electric fence. Black can't capture right here because of the rook. It says the best move for black is to move right here. And again, be very relentless with those checks. So we'll move the queen over again. And you can see we still have this mini electric fence. Best move for the king is to move down here. Now you can't move the queen in front of the king because the bishop is protecting it, but you can put the king in check by moving the queen to e2. Let's see, so we got an electric fence here and here. That can't be taken, that. So you can see there's only 1 square that the king can move to. So we'll move the king right there. When you're really close to checkmating your king with 2 pieces, like a queen and the rook, the queen should almost always make the last move. So what we're going to do here is move the rook down 1 square right next to the king. Some kids may claim that this is stalemate because there's no place for the king to move, but a stalemate only happens when black doesn't have any other pieces. And you can see that black still has 4 more pieces in the game. And it's why in chess, if you're playing somebody, it's a really good idea to allow them to keep a couple of pieces on the board rather than taking everything off the board except for their king. Because when there's other pieces on the board, then there's other moves that they can make. So because black has 4 other pieces, we'll just have black take a pawn right here. And now, when you have 2 pieces lined up for a checkmate, the queen is who delivers the checkmate. And I like putting the queen directly in front of the king.
Okay, checkmate.
When the king's on the side of the board, there's no place for the king to move, and the queen is being backed up by the rook. That did not happen in this game. In fact, I'm just going to play through the rest of the game really fast. You can see black just took a rook for free. And this game ran out of time, and I don't even know if the game would have even finished. Both sides had a great opportunity to win this game, but it didn't happen. So you can see it's a queen versus a knight, which white should win. It won't be really easy because that knight could be kind of pesky, but white should be able to pull out a win. And in these situations, the queen should try to fork the king and the knight. But again, this is where the game ended in a draw, and again, either side could have easily won this game.